So what's the difference between IVF and surrogacy? Well, what's the difference between a frappuccino and a macchiato? I don't know. I'm the guy who goes to Starbucks and asks for a medium, and they say grande, and I'm like, I guess. So, like frappuccinos and macchiatos, they're related, but they're not the same. That's what we're talking about in today's episode. Hello, I'm Corlandos Scott, and I am a surrogacy attorney in Los Angeles. I've dedicated my entire practice to surrogacy and all types of other assisted reproductive technologies like egg donation, sperm donation, and all that good stuff. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the difference between IVF and surrogacy. I should say the differences and similarities and the overlap. So we're going to first look at the definitions of each, and then we'll talk about them individually. Let's jump right in. IVF, or in vitro fertilization, helps you with the fertilization and the development of embryos using your own gametes or someone else's gametes, and the implantation of those embryos into yourself or another woman to help you get pregnant. Surrogacy is a fertility treatment that may or may not require you lending your own genes to create an embryo, but the resulting embryo is transferred into the uterus of another woman who will carry the baby to full term on your behalf. All right, so I'm going to stay with my food analogies. IVF and surrogacy, you can think of them like an onion versus a shallot. You know, each oniony, but all different layers, but different purposes, different strength. You'd use them in different dishes at different times, right? I mean, if I'm going to be honest with you, I'm really not a chef or culinary to any degree. I can barely pop popcorn, but I just thought that would help make sense. If we're looking at it like that onion that has many different layers, in assisted reproduction, the IVF process would be the first layer in the onion, so to speak. What I mean by that is that the IVF procedures signal the beginning of the entire process, whether or not you're working with a surrogate. Now, when you bring surrogacy into the picture, surrogacy would be like the main dish that you're preparing, because surrogacy comes after you have the IVF procedures taken care of. All right, enough about food because clearly I'm way out of my weight class here. So let's look at the individual procedures for IVF and surrogacy and see how they overlap and work together. Now, as I go through these procedures, keep in mind, I am not a doctor. I don't even think I've ever played one on TV. So when you're thinking about going through the IVF process, it's so important to reach out to a medical professional around you and near you so that you can get the actual skinny on what it will look like for you to go through the IVF process. But let's look at the process in general. One of the first things that's going to happen in that process is the doctor is going to help you establish a timeline. How do we do that? Well, the timeline is going to be based on your menstrual cycle and the preparation of the medicines for whoever will be donating their eggs for the IVF procedure, whether that's you or an egg donor. The next step in the process is ovarian stimulation. This is when you will be given medication to stimulate the ovaries to produce the mass quantity of eggs that we hope to go in and retrieve for the cycle. Usually this is done with injectable medications, but it can also be done with oral medication. Next is the trigger injection, or we call it the trigger shot. This is a hormonal injection given to the woman to help trigger ovulation. Next comes the egg retrieval and or the semen collection. This is where the doctor uses a ultrasound guided probe with a needle attached to accomplish it. And you also hear it referred to as an egg pickup or harvesting or an aspiration, but this is where the doctor actually goes in and gets the mature eggs that are ready to be harvested. Now, as intense as this sounds, the process usually takes only about 20 to 30 minutes. Now, as for the semen collection part of it, it's a lot more straightforward and doesn't require sedation, and guys, you get off the hook a lot easier. You're simply provided a cup and sent to a private room for the semen collection. All right, now that we have eggs and we have sperm, it's time to introduce the two, and this is the fertilization and embryo development portion. Now, let's just be honest. I am not an embryologist, and this is the part that's way too sciencey and complicated for me. But suffice it to say, this is the portion of the process where the embryologists fertilize the egg with the retrieved sperm, and they're placed in an incubator overnight and allowed to develop into blastocysts. Then comes the embryo transfer. Once we have embryos that are developed and ready to be transferred, that's when the mother or the surrogate will come to the clinic and the doctor will transfer the embryo into that uterus with the hope that it will implant. And before I talk about the last step in the process, go ahead and click that like button so YouTube will know to share this with other people. And subscribe to the channel and get those alerts. That way you know whenever I release a new video. Hey, it might just be the one that you've been waiting on all your life. Who knows? So let's talk about the last step in the process. Finally, we get to the pregnancy test and confirmation stage of the process. Now, this is going to play out in IVF and surrogacy because, of course, surrogacy picks up towards the end of the IVF process. Surrogacy starts once the IVF process has been completed to the point of embryo creation. And that's when a woman who's been medically and psychologically screened and put on cycle medications to be prepared and ready comes in to receive the transfer of the embryo that's been created through IVF. So really they play very well together. But at this final stage, we're looking to confirm whether that transferred embryo did in fact implant and result in a pregnancy. So as you see, IVF and surrogacy are certainly related, but they're not necessarily the same. Surrogacy depends on the IVF process, and the IVF process often ends in a surrogacy journey. So if you want to know more about how to navigate the surrogacy process, click the link below and get a free resource that I have for you. It's called the Surrogacy Roadmap, and it takes you through the entire surrogacy process from IVF to delivery and everything in between, and I explain to you what to look out for. So make sure you get your hands on that. Go ahead, click the link in the description box below, and I'll see you along the Surrogacy Roadmap.